Joe Burrow continued his participation in Cincinnati Bengals Minicamp. Let's get into all the observations and takeaways from Minicamp Day 2.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals. James, you and I have been doing this show together for 5 years now? Is that right? 4 years? I don't know. It's been a long time. So if you're looking
We're in
for
our
daily
fifth year.
coverage,
Season 5.
okay, there we go. If you're looking for daily coverage on the Cincinnati Bengals from a couple of guys who have been doing it for a long time now. Man, is that a long time. This is a place to find it. You can subscribe on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. And if you're new to the show, you can join the Everydayer Club, or those of you who make us your first listen. We appreciate all of you who make us part of your daily routine. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time, where you can save $20 on your first purchase of tickets with the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. Terms do apply. And James, today we're going to dive into day 2 of Cincinnati Bengals minicamp, most likely the last intense day of minicamp. And unless something wild happens on Thursday's practice, this will be our last episode for this week, as we are in off-season mode here on Locked On Bengals. And of course, we start with Joe Burrow's participation and Ja'Marr Chase's participation, the two biggest stars on the offense and on the team. Joe Burrow continues to throw, continues to participate, and Ja'Marr Chase doesn't quite continue at a full capacity.
Who are you worried about most? I think that's a question we could pose if this was first take. This isn't first take. This is Locked On Bengals. So let's start with Joe Burrow. I thought he looked fine on Wednesday. He's not throwing with the same, and this is back-to-back days now, the same velocity that we saw certainly like at the end of May, a few weeks ago, third week of May, end of May, when he was really ripping it. And so now we have the pattern where we hinted at it yesterday on our last episode, but today it's like, all right, well, is he unleashing it downfield? Well, there weren't many deep balls. Now, did he push the ball? Did he throw to the sideline? Yeah, he did some of that. And I would say more than he did on Tuesday. But it still wasn't the normal Joe Burrow experience. And I think it's really because, well, there's a bunch of reasons why it could be. But I think part of it very well could be the Bengals are like, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is how we'll approach this. And we'll hopefully see more velocity when training camp starts. But they can't control what Joe does away from the building and away from the facility. So I do wonder if there's some of that there where you're like, hey, you put the governor on him for now and go from there. Because I thought maybe just one day on Tuesday, who knows? Well, no, we have back-to-back days now. So I think it's fair to say, all right, well, he's not throwing with as much velocity. And again, I think it could be intentional. I don't think he's not capable of doing that. But the velocity on his throws was lower than normal today.
I mean, this comes on the heels of an episode yesterday and a day in which Joe Burrow spent 18 to 19 minutes with the media in the press conference room at Paycor Stadium after practice, talking largely about how he needs to listen to his body more, needs to not push through things and not fight through things at the level that he's done it in the past, learning lessons from the calf injury, learning about his importance to the team, learning that they have a capable backup quarterback in Jake Browning if he has to miss a game here or there because he's not able to go at a level where he can play normal Joe Burrow football. See the first few weeks of last season. Maybe this is some reflection on that as well to some degree, but either way, he spent a lot of time talking about taking care of himself, making sure that he's prioritizing rest. And, you talk about what he's going to do when he's away from the team. And even when he's talking about his plans for this little break, including training, he's talking about doing it in a smart way with plenty of rest and all of these things. So when you take all of those things together, it could just be as simple as not trying to push through something, trying to take care of himself. And that's a simple answer. As far as Ja'Marr Chase, he was present once again. Of course, the Bengals have full attendance for the mandatory minicamp, except for Drew Sample, who has an excused absence. And of course, T. Higgins, who's not under contract, has no contractual obligation to be present at this point in time. But Jamar Chase, for the second straight day, not a full participant, let's say, in the minicamp practice, going through walkthroughs, and not a whole lot after that.
No, and I don't think it's anything, but it's not nothing. And I'm not trying to make a mountain out of it, but it is interesting that he didn't partake in any of the individual drills. We're not talking about just 7-on-7, to be clear, where we have seen over the past couple of days, a couple guys go to the ground. And maybe you don't want to risk that if you're Jamar. I get that. But even the individual drills, which are, I mean, every receiver goes through them, even if you're really limited. I've seen T. Higgins go through individual drills at the start of practices and not play 2 days later. And when we're there for individual drills, he goes through them because it gives at least the hint that he could potentially play, and they want to see where he's at. And that's just one example. The point is Jamar not going through those is interesting. I don't know if it means anything. I don't think it means he's upset that he doesn't have a contract yet. I think he was willing and really wanted to wait on Justin Jefferson. I think the Bengals are willing to wait. We've seen that. They are content in waiting. And so I don't know. Jamar didn't talk after practice either. But I don't think it's a big thing. It might just be his mindset, given that this is June, given the long view approach that Joe is certainly taking. And we've seen Jamar take that same approach in the past. And so maybe that's all he's doing. I will say this. He looks, and I talked to him today, and I told him this, instant I don't know the word I'm going for here. But my first glance of Jamar Chase right away, like up close, it's like, oh, he's bigger. And I said that. And so it is good to see he's clearly putting in the work, because I bet he's lifted more weight than he ever has. And it certainly looks that way.
And he's always been a freaky pound for pound strength guy in the NFL. Was it first impression? But it's not really the first impression because you've seen him before. But
yeah, I think so.
This year,
long day. I think first impression. Yeah, like my first reaction to seeing him, up close was like, "Oh, you're bigger." Yeah, and I literally said it. He was like, "What's that mean?" it became a fun conversation.
He does look like he's stronger. I mean, you can see that in the media day photos. The Steve Smith build vibes kind of continue for me, like a slight, because he's a little bit taller than Steve Smith, right? Yeah. But just like
he's bigger than Steve. Yeah,
Steve Smith was, strong, muscled up, short, not small, kind of like he wasn't that short, obviously, but like incredibly strong player. And there are some stylistic similarities in the way they play. Anyway, Steve Smith vibes a little bit from Jamar Chase in terms of the way they're built. The innocuous explanation for why Jamar Chase didn't practice is he hasn't been there for all of the OTAs, and they don't want to, ramp him up too fast, potentially. Like maybe his conditioning from a, football practice conditioning perspective isn't exactly where they want it to be, or maybe they just didn't have him through the ramp up period, and they're like, we'll just wait and get you ramped up for training camp in a few weeks, and we'll go from there. But it could be as simple as between the coaches and Jamar, they just decided not to do it. Not to say Jamar isn't in shape. That's not what I'm saying. But just, a decision from a ramp up perspective where they don't want to risk a lower body soft tissue injury and going too fast into things at that positions that have, the sprinting component of the game, not as much with the offensive line if you're thinking of Trent Brown, but avoiding those lower body soft tissue injuries is an emphasis in the NFL, and it could be as simple as that.
Sure. Yeah, maybe. And in that, but I would still expect them to do individuals.
Sure.
That's all. That's where the team stuff. Yeah. I mean, I watched multiple guys get tackled, honestly, on accident. And so you don't want Jamar to get involved in stuff like that. And so freak things happen even in 7-on-7, but the individual thing, again, I don't really think it matters. I don't. I think Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase are going to be just fine. And to your point, I think he's in awesome shape. But could the Bengals be like, And by the way, when we hear from Zach Taylor on Thursday, he may say that, we We decided to hold Jamar back a little bit. Chase Brown didn't practice either. So it might just be the chases where it's like, nah, the chases, protect them, put them in a box and make sure that they're ready for training camp.
Just some good old-fashioned precautionary withholding of full go practice for a couple of Bengals here in early June. Coming up next, the secondary battles have been interesting, and I wouldn't call minicamp and the offseason program a time for those battles to really have a winner or loser, but they have been set up quite nicely for training camp. Let's get into what's happened so far and what we expect in training camp from those defensive backs coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time makes getting tickets to your favorite events easier, whether it's the Cincinnati Reds as they continue to try to rebound after an ugly May. Maybe you're interested, and I know at least one Bengal that's interested in NBA Finals tickets for Game 4 in Dallas. Well, guess what? I told him, and I'm going to tell you, go to Game Time where you can get the tickets that you're looking for. Finding tickets to the NBA Finals or any event is faster, it's easier with Game Time. They have views directly from your feet, from your seat, so you can see exactly where your feet are going to go as you sit there and enjoy your favorite events. Plus, they're all in prices, and this is such a handy tool. You know exactly how much you're going to pay, including fees, including everything. So there's no hidden fees. There's no hidden agendas when you go to check out. No, you'll know exactly what you're going to spend. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Going into the offseason program, going into training camp, going into the regular season, we have talked and will continue to talk about defensive back battles and the secondary in general. We did our biggest questions on the defensive side of the ball. I think it was a couple of weeks ago now, James. Maybe it was last week. Time is a vortex. And one of the big questions was, what happens with the secondary? Are they better with dealing with explosive plays? Do they have improved communication with the safeties? Do they find a viable or good even outside starting corner to go with Cam Taylor-Britt and to go with Mike Hilton in the slot? And these battles have really been kind of interesting to watch throughout the offseason program. And like I said before, you don't declare winners and losers or favorites necessarily at this time of year. Mm-hmm. But you have an idea where things are and who the competitors will be going in to training camp. And that's where we are today, where, you know, Von Bell and Geno Stone look like it will have to take a big effort from Jordan Battle potentially in that battle at safety. And then at corner, you have reporting that suggests that Dax Hill is getting the first goes with the ones, and he's rotating with DJ Turner still. But these battles are certainly taking focus on a day where the defensive backs in particular, and I know it wasn't just the defensive backs, but there were multiple pass breakups of Joe Burrow and Jake Browning passes from these guys that are setting up to be in this competition to start for this team in the secondary.
Yeah, I think it's probably, at least as of now, the biggest training camp battle there is between DJ Turner and Dax Hill. And it's because you're talking about a guy that's going to play so much. And the other one, whoever doesn't win the battle is still probably going to play a lot. But yeah, it's probably the one that's most up in the air. I mean, the day they signed Von Bell, I was like, oh yeah, he's probably starting. Like, it didn't take long to get to that conclusion. And so to see him out there is not a shock to me. And I think it will be Von Bell and Geno Stone. I really don't know who it's going to be alongside Cam Taylor-Britt and Mike Hilton. I think Dax Hill could certainly win that job. Wouldn't shock me. I also think DJ Turner had multiple pass breakups on Wednesday. Dax Hill, the same. I think they're going to go at it, and they're different. They're different players. I think that's what's interesting about this matchup is you have someone in Turner who has this elite quickness and foot speed and makeup speed, but he doesn't have the size that Dax Hill has. Dax Hill is stronger. Dax Hill is really athletic, does also have great straight line speed. and I think has really good instincts, ball instincts, and knowing where the ball is. We saw that some last year at safety, certainly when he was in man coverage against tight ends too. So I think it's still 50-50. I don't think there's a leader. I know some feel one way or the other that have reported. That's fine. With me, I think it's 50-50. I think if the season started today, DJ Turner would be out there, but Daxo would be right behind him. But that's just me picking, really defaulting to the guy that played so much last year at that position. And I do think it's not only a true competition, but really split down the middle as of right now.
Yeah, and that's why it will be so interesting in camp. I think it's easy to read into who's playing with what unit in the off-season program, even early in training camp. And time again, and I've said this on the podcast before, coaches have kind of told us, like, don't necessarily read too much into who's playing with what unit. This has been something like multiple times we've heard. Like, it's not necessarily as big of a deal as it seems, even if Dax Hill has been the first corner out there with the first team for 4 straight days. Maybe that means something. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's planned rotation. Maybe it's a matchup thing. Who knows what the plan is? We certainly don't from the outside. So sometimes they're being coy and it actually does mean something. And they're like, trying to downplay it and trying not to bring too much attention to it. But sometimes it truly is just part of the plan. For example, Amarius Mims and Trent Brown continue to rotate at right tackle. And maybe there's a competition coming there in camp as well. Certainly could be, because Mims has gotten all the extra run in the offseason program. But I'm just throwing the caution we've heard from coaches before out there as to who's playing with what unit and things like that. Still, on a day where, Dax Hill has a couple pass breakups, DJ Turner has a couple pass breakups, and it's a good day for both of them. It is interesting and does really highlight that battle that is coming. What do you think of the safety situation? The Von Bell Jordan battle situation here as we reflect on the offseason program on the whole.
As far as how they're playing, or
well, like how much of a competition do you think that is? How much of a chance do we think Jordan Battle really has going into training camp?
It's a uphill. It's much different. I actually think that you mentioned Trent Brown and Marius Mims. I think Mims has a better chance to start than Jordan Battle. And and I think both are uphill climbs, and the Bengals, as of now, Trent Brown would start. All those things. Von Bell is such an important piece in that locker room and a big piece of that locker room. And it isn't just the leadership stuff, because he can still play. And so when you have that and you have a guy that can still do it, and that is as confident as they come, has plenty to prove as a player. I mean, whether it's personally or whatever it is, why wouldn't he go out there and be able to ball out? I think is how the Bengals view it. So yeah, I think he's got a few notches ahead of Jordan Battle. That doesn't mean that Jordan can't win the competition. It's just an uphill climb. And we've seen stranger things happen, but he's going to have to start balling out right now. And my prediction would be, as of now, you have Geno Stone and Von Bell starting, and then your free safety behind Geno Stone is Tyson Anderson, who's continuing to work his way back from the ACL. And then you have a guy in Jordan Battle who looked pretty good last year. There's no doubt about it. But I do think that maybe the PFFs of the world were higher on him than the Bengals coaching staff was in their year-end evals. And so hopefully he can continue to progress. I think there's still a spot for him in the long-term future, right? And probably he's going to have to make a ton of plays this year. But I do think that Von Bell is certainly ahead of him as of right now.
Yeah, it feels uphill battle is a good way to put it. I think it is something that he would really have to go take. He would really have to go and win the job. And maybe he emerges over the course of the year again. Maybe it's similar to last year where as time goes on, he starts to get onto the field more. Like you said, I think there was plenty of encouraging results for Jordan Battle when he was on the field. And it just took a little bit of time for him to get there. And then they had all those communication issues that really seemed to be the impetus for a lot of the changes the Bengals are making in the defensive secondary. And if that is the point of emphasis, well, it would make sense that Von Bell would be ahead there. On the other side of the ball, the skill players. The wide receivers have made things pretty interesting in this offseason program with some depth guys showing up in some interesting ways that will make those roster battles somewhat fun to follow or very fun to follow, depending on how deep in the depth chart you like to follow roster battles in training camp. We'll talk about those guys to finish up the show coming up next.
You're right. It has been really interesting to see this wide receiver room evolve. Like, for example, I mentioned Jamar Chase and his size, Jake, and how he looks bigger. I think Cedric Jackson looks bigger, looks stronger. Someone that Joe Burrow pointed out. Andrei Iosivas, certainly. The moment I saw him, I was like, oh, he's certainly been in the weight room working out. Charlie Jones talked to him on Wednesday, and he discussed how important it was for him to get stronger this offseason, and feels like he's in a good spot to earn the trust of the Bengals coaching staff. Obviously, Trenton Irwin has a lot of trust already. All right, well, there's 4 guys that aren't T. Higgins, that isn't Jamar Chase or a Mike Gesicki, who we expect to take some wide receiver snaps. So there's a lot of competition in the back end of that wide receiver room for sure.
And I think part of the question then becomes, how many receivers do we think that they'll reasonably consider keeping? And do these guys do
12.
enough on special teams? Yeah, you
12.
wish. Twice as many as they kept last year. I thought it was 7. I just went and double checked on August
6
29th
last year.
after initial cutdowns. It was 6. Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, of course, Trenton Irwin, Charlie Jones, and Iosivas, the 2 rookies last year, made it. And this year, you would say
Yoshi beat out Stanley Morgan Jr. That was
Right.
the surprise, is that Stanley got cut.
Yeah, we thought they would keep 7, I think.
Yep.
Or at least I thought they would keep 7. And
Yeah,
they
yeah.
had 3 wide receivers on the practice squad, on the initial practice squad. Stanley Morgan Jr., one of those. Not Kendrick Pryor. He was
Kwame Lassiter and
Kwame
Cedric
Lassiter and Cedric Jackson. Those guys still competing for jobs this year. And, Kwame Lassiter making a nice one-handed catch from Jake Browning in practice.
Yep.
And Cedric Jackson continuing to work with all levels of the offense, from the 1s to the 3s. The question, though, really becomes, do they keep a guy beyond the first 6? Assuming the first 6 are still Chase, Higgins. I would say Burton is certainly safe as a 3rd-round pick. Jones, Iosivas, who's had a really good offseason. Maybe if you picked a winner of the offseason program, I think he would be one of the top candidates. And Trenton Irwin, who continues to be a solid and trusted wide receiver. Those would be the 6. Unseating any of those guys, I think, for Cedric Jackson or Kwame Lassiter or Kendrick Pryor or Cole Burgess would be really hard. But do any of those guys do enough on special teams in the kick return game or in the kick coverage game to force the Bengals to keep a 7th guy? It's hard, because that 7th guy, if you're going to keep a 7th receiver, he probably needs to be active on game days to justify using the roster spot there. But if you do enough on special teams and you're showing enough as a receiver, you have a chance. And these guys have been, in their own ways, pretty impressive. Burgess catching a deep pass yesterday, I believe. Cedric Jackson showing up throughout. Like I said, starting with the 1s all the way down to the 3s, and Lassiter with a few nice plays and has some involvement already in the special teams aspect of the game. Those guys are particularly interesting, and you can't forget how upset Bengals fans were when they lost Kendrick Pryor before he returned to the practice squad because of his strong preseason.
Yeah, that's right. Speaking of, Kendrick Pryor had some really nice. I'm not a big fan of Kevin Durant shoes. He had some good, some sweet looking Kevin Durant's on. They're older ones, he said, but on Tuesday, complimented him. And since I'm on the shoe kick, just to throw him out there, Von Bell has some of the sickest shoes on the team. Multiple pairs of awesome Kobe's. So shout out to Von Bell. That said, I had these conversations this week, and they're at the top of my mind. Yeah, it's really interesting that like a Cole Burgess, super athletic, could be a weapon on kickoff returns, and is eager to show that he can play at this level. And so can he be your Andrei Iosivas light this year? Where maybe he doesn't make the roster, but you can stash him on the practice squad, and who knows, maybe he ends up contributing on special teams. Or maybe he pushes for that 7th spot. Or maybe it is a guy like Cedric Jackson who has that super freakish speed and has put on some good weight, like I mentioned. It's a crowded room and it's crowded really quick. And it's because part of it's because you've always looked at the Bengals wide receivers and thought, all right, well, it's the big three. And by always, I mean the past 3+ years during this run. Now there isn't a big three. It's like a big two, but we kind of know that T. Higgins isn't going to be here long term. So, all right, well, where does Jermaine Burton fit? Is Andrei Iosivas going to be T. Higgins light when you need him to be? That allows you to play Jamar Chase in the slot more? Or is Jermaine Burton going to be that explosive slot, and so you want to keep Chase outside some? Or does Charlie Jones get in the mix? And is he Tyler Boyd light? Like I could go down on and about how all of these things. Or does Trenton Irwin say, no, I'm going to be long-haired Tyler Boyd? And you get my point. Is like there's a lot of variations here where all of these guys contribute in one way or another. It won't happen. All of these guys aren't going to contribute, but how they get there, how they battle it out, could certainly be interesting. And by all, I mean everybody that you mentioned, from Kendrick Pryor, Cole Burgess, on up the roster. But they're not all going to contribute this season. But could they push each other, and could the Bengals keep 7? I do think that there's a very real possibility you're looking at 7 receivers at the same time. Maybe not. Maybe there's this is one of the years where there's a surprise cut at the end. You never know.
We haven't obviously taken an in-depth look yet at where we think the roster cuts will be. Just gut feel, they have a lot of tight ends that they're going to want to keep.
Mm-hmm.
They have a lot of guys in the trenches to sort through. We haven't talked trenches much because that's the nature of this part of the offseason program. In case you're wondering where that talk is, they're not wearing pads. They're not going full contact. So not much to talk about there. The secondary is going to be pretty fully stocked, especially at corner, where Alan George, Josh Newton, DJ Ivey are rounding that room out. They drafted Dejon Anthony late in the 7th round, and he's a draft pick. Not that draft picks always make the team, but pretty good chance or solid chance of making the team as a draft pick. So there's a lot of bodies there. But when you look at the talent on the team, if these guys have taken a step, and it's not like we're talking about first round picks or day 2 picks, obviously, but we're talking about a bunch of college free agents here. But if they take the steps and have graduated a little bit in their 2nd and 3rd years, then maybe one of them does make that argument for that 7th spot to be spent on a wide receiver. And so this is something that will be interesting to consider when we think about those 53-man projections as time goes on.
Yep. How much versatility can you bring? How much can you do? For example, Charlie Jones, how does he get ahead of Trenton Irwin? Well, you show you can do both. Show that you can play in the slot at a high level, and you show if you're called upon to play outside, you can do that. Andrei Iosivas, how does he get on the field? He shows he can be this awesome red zone target, which he showed flashes of last year, and someone that can play outside and be that third outside option that isn't Jamar Chase or T. Higgins. And so who's he competing with? Well, he's competing with Jermaine Burton, Trenton Irwin, and then it'll trickle down from there. And so it's going to be a lot of fun because I think these guys are talented. I think Charlie Jones is certainly in a better spot than he was a year ago. Andrei Iosivas is. Trenton Irwin is probably eager to show that he can do more and have an even bigger role than he's had over the past couple of seasons, where he's emerged as a reliable target for Joe Burrow. So the wide receiver room, as the world turns, Jake, is going to be a fun one when camp starts.
Yeah. Iosivas in particular, for me, makes it interesting. Jermaine Burton, does he progress to a level where they're more confident in him going into the season to play a significant role? Very interesting to me. The slot battle, very interesting to me, because we still don't really have a great idea of what their plan is for that position. We have ideas of a bunch of guys that could do the job, but who steps up and kind of runs away with it or stakes a claim to it early in the season. This is something that might take some time in season for them to figure out even, but will be fun to watch throughout camp. I agree with you there, James. The wide receivers should be fun this year, and there will be other things that'll be fun too that we'll start to get to once the pads come on and we get a little bit more of that live competition.
There's more to football than wide receivers.
Yeah, it's just you have to wait until after June for those guys to really start popping.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Not in June. In June, it's just we play 7-on-7. We put on flags, and that's it. That's football.
I would dominate some flag football.
Someone get out here, recruit James onto their flag football team in the Cincinnati area. He'll come out there, get him on video.
I'm open.
Start putting it on social media. We'll have fun with it. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On
Look how open
Bengals
he is.
podcast. If there is something pressing that we need to cover, we will be back after tomorrow's practice. But barring that, we're not expecting anything crazy to be coming out of tomorrow's minicamp practice. That'll be it for this week on Locked On Bengals, and we'll be back for you next week. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.